U.S. Navy Secretary John F. Fillon has reported that the domestic shipbuilding industry is in disarray, with nuclear submarine construction programs consistently facing long-term delays and cost overruns. At the same time, the Pentagon is reportedly considering scrapping the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal. If Australia still wants to buy US nuclear submarines, it might need to curry favour with a powerful figure first. On June 11th, Bloomberg reported, citing US officials, that the Trump administration had initiated a review of the AUKUS nuclear submarine agreement days earlier. US officials stated that the US plans to scrap the agreement on the grounds that it does not align with the President's America First agenda, effectively halting military cooperation with Australia in the nuclear submarine sector. In 2021, the US, UK, and Australia announced the formation of a new security alliance called AUKUS. As a key cooperation project under this alliance, the US and UK were to provide nuclear submarine technology to Australia, assisting it in forming a nuclear-powered submarine fleet to enhance the Royal Australian Navy's combat capabilities and strategically counterbalance the Chinese Navy. During the Biden administration, the AUKUS agreement was highly valued by the Pentagon, considered one of the key decisions regarding China. The US and Australia also confirmed that Australia would purchase 5 US Virginia-class nuclear submarines. In reality, AUKUS was not limited to submarines, but also included advanced weapons technology such as hypersonic missiles. Kurt Campbell, who managed AUKUS affairs as Deputy Secretary of State under the Biden administration, once called AUKUS the most important military and strategic cooperation for the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom in generations. For the US, sharing the crown jewel of its defense technology with another country was extraordinary. For Australia, AUKUS was the largest defense project in its history, representing a significant enhancement of its military capabilities, especially its submarine strength. The country was set to become the second, after the UK, to receive advanced US nuclear propulsion technology. Australia was also expected to become the 7th country in the world to possess nuclear submarines. After the news broke, the reactions from Australia and the UK were noteworthy. According to Australian media, a spokesperson for Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles confirmed that both Canberra and London had been notified. In other words, the US did not consult beforehand but simply informed its allies that it might be pulling out. The US suddenly reneging on this important agreement, citing only it does not align with the President's America First agenda, is an insufficient explanation. The real reasons for the potential scrapping of the AUKUS agreement lie elsewhere. The answer to the problem can be found in the statement made by US Navy Secretary John F. Fillon during his testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. At the hearing, Fillon sharply criticized the state of the US domestic shipbuilding industry. He stated that all projects involving the US Navy are in disarray, either falling behind schedule or exceeding development budgets. The best performing project was still more than 6 months behind schedule and 57% over budget, to say nothing of other projects. The Constellation-class frigate project, after 3 years of construction, is stuck at 10% completion, and even the entire ship's design blueprint has not yet been finalized. Construction can only proceed concurrently with design, causing repeated delays in its projected service date, now pushing towards 2030. The estimated construction and procurement cost of $800 to $900 million has also surged to over $1.4 billion. The situation is even worse for the Columbia-class and Virginia-class nuclear submarine projects, which are under intense scrutiny from the Pentagon. According to the Congressional Budget Office cost estimates based on 2020 for dollar values, the unit procurement cost of a Virginia-class attack nuclear submarine is a staggering $5.1 billion. The price of a Columbia-class strategic nuclear submarine is nearly double that of a Virginia-class, reaching approximately $9.4 billion. What does $9.4 billion mean? The USS George H.W. Bush, the youngest of the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers and touted as the most expensive carrier in the 2000s, was valued at a maximum of $6.3 billion. The budget to build a Columbia-class nuclear submarine, with a displacement of less than 20,000 tons, would be enough for the US to build 1,500,000-ton Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Furthermore, the Trump administration's imposition of 25% tariffs on all imported steel and aluminum products, including from allied countries like Australia, Canada, and the UK, will undoubtedly significantly push up the construction costs of nuclear submarines, making already expensive nuclear submarine programs even more unpredictable. More critically, cost is just one of the myriad problems facing the Virginia and Columbia-class nuclear submarines. Another major issue is that these submarines are being built too slowly. Construction of the Columbia-class is delayed by 18 months, and the first Virginia-class by 24 months. At this rate, the US Navy will find it difficult to acquire new nuclear submarines before 2029. Without new nuclear submarines entering service, asking the US Navy to hand over 5 Virginia-class submarines to Australia would be akin to crippling the US Navy's own submarine force. Moreover, even by 2029, the US Navy can at most expect to receive 1 Columbia-class and 2 Virginia-class submarines. Yet, under the agreement, the US is supposed to provide Australia with 5 Virginia-class submarines. If all were given away, there would be a shortfall of 3 submarines with no way to compensate. If the US Navy itself is short by 5 nuclear submarines, it cannot win a fight. In addition, the Pentagon has realized another problem. The Chinese Navy's anti-submarine warfare capabilities are rapidly growing. Even if the Virginia-class nuclear submarine stealth capabilities are among the top tier globally, that doesn't mean it can operate deep and unhindered in waters near China alone. Submarines require systemic support to unleash their combat effectiveness and avoid being detected by an adversary's anti-submarine forces. The Royal Australian Navy clearly lacks the capability to establish such a system. In this context, selling Virginia-class nuclear submarines to them is no different in essence from selling Rafale fighter jets to India. Faced with the Chinese Navy's comprehensive combat system, and with the clearly disconnected Australian Navy, Virginia-class nuclear submarines would have little significant role to play in the Indo-Pacific geopolitical game. Furthermore, the US Navy certainly does not want to see Australia's Virginia-class submarines sunk in a battle with the Chinese Navy. Not only would it be embarrassing, but it would also risk exposing the US Navy's own submarine performance secrets. On one hand, the US itself cannot produce 5 nuclear submarines for Australia. On the other hand, nuclear submarines sold to Australia would struggle to play their intended role. If there is no strong driving force compelling the Pentagon to uphold the AUKUS agreement, it's not surprising that this rather useless agreement might be scrapped. Of course, if Australia insists on buying US nuclear submarines, it's not without options. The method is simple: pay, and pay a lot of money. Donald Trump has the final say on whether the Pentagon will unilaterally scrap the AUKUS agreement. It's not out of the question that Trump might feel that selling such expensive submarines to Australia would be a loss for the US and thus, with a wave of his hand, decide to scrap the agreement. While outwardly proclaiming to build a global security order, he is inwardly extremely shrewd. This is the reality of so-called American leadership. In fact, Trump himself has not been particularly invested in AUKUS, which was initiated by Biden. In February of this year, during UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's visit to the White House, when asked about the issue, Trump reportedly said, "What is AUKUS?" Public opinion also noted that US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, likely a mistranslation, as the context points to a Trump-era official or a more recent, aligned figure. Perhaps Secretary of State Mike Pompeo or a defense secretary who served under Trump recently attended the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore and delivered an important speech on the Trump administration's Asia policy without mentioning AUKUS. Honestly, the AUKUS agreement appears to be a farce no matter how one looks at it. In February of this year, Australia paid an initial $500 million prepayment to the US and is prepared to bear $155 billion to $239.3 billion in financial expenditure over the next 30 years for the AUKUS agreement. Furthermore, last year, Australia also shelled out $3 billion to support the UK in accelerating the construction of AUKUS-class nuclear submarine reactors. And it plans to launch the Stirling Naval Base renovation project, costing approximately $5.2 billion this year. However, after paying so much money and bearing such high financial pressure, Australia has received nothing. Instead, It has been criticized by the Trump administration for not doing enough to counter China and has been urged to increase its defense budget to 3% of GDP. This shows that the AUKUS agreement is essentially a security tax paid by Australia. The Biden administration at the time might have been content with Australia's performance, but the current US president is the more voracious and greedy Trump. In his eyes, the security tax paid by Australia is far from enough. As for Australia, highly intertwined with the US in politics, military, and diplomacy, it has no choice but to obediently pay up. US politicians have repeatedly incited Hungary to restrict trade relations with China, which has caused dissatisfaction in Hungary. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban recently emphasized in an interview that China's investment in Hungary is enormous and the US cannot conduct trade with China itself, while demanding that Hungary not trade with China. On June 13th, Orban's official account published the interview content. Orban told the host that China has a lot of investment in Hungary, and while they also call on the US to invest in Hungary, American investment is very limited. Trade is beneficial for us, but the US should not try to demand that we should not develop trade with China, especially when you yourselves are trading with China. He added, "My point is, you should also develop trade with us and provide us with good job opportunities like China does. I believe we should separate national security and military from business, trade, and economy." Orban emphasized that Hungary's official policy is to balance East and West, welcoming investment from both. He stated that Hungary has a vast industrial base, making it an ideal convergence point in their strategy for Eastern and Western enterprises to invest and cooperate well. This is a significant advantage they do not want to give up. According to a June 16th report from the Hungarian Budapest Times, Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade Peter Szijjártó stated on social media that a trade agreement between China and the US is good news for Hungary. These two countries are Hungary's largest trading partners and investors outside the EU. Szijjártó noted that the EU situation is concerning, putting Brussels in an awkward position. When the US and China reach an agreement, the EU isolates itself from key players in the global economy, Szijjártó said. He added that the EU has not yet reached a tariff agreement with the US, but has imposed additional tariffs on China's automotive industry and sanctions on Russia, causing a sharp decline in European competitiveness. Szijjártó also stated that the damage caused to the European economy by the Ursula von der Leyen-led European Commission is more severe than any tariff. Since the beginning of this year, US politicians have repeatedly incited Hungary to break away from its dependence on China. On April 15th, the charge d'affaires of the US Embassy in Hungary stated at a meeting in Budapest that President Trump's stance is clear: China poses a strategic challenge to the United States and our allies. These challenges require vigilance, transparency, and solidarity. Just 10 days later, Donald Trump Jr. traveled to Budapest, strongly advocating that the China challenge was greater than Russia's, urging Hungary to cooperate with the US to reduce risks, with breaking dependence on China being the first step. Even US media like Bloomberg admit that such rhetoric might displease Eastern European countries like Hungary because these countries have opened their doors to Chinese investment. Hungarians have long made their calculations. US investment stock in Hungary is only 9 billion euros and continues to shrink due to tax disputes. In contrast, Hungary has attracted billions of dollars in Chinese investment, with 5.2 billion euros poured in during 2024 alone, including in the battery and electric vehicle sectors. Major Chinese projects like Cattle, Future, and BYD directly create 24,000 jobs. While the US is still offering empty promises of democracy and freedom, Chinese engineers have already taught Hungarian workers how to weld battery modules. This is the real strategic deterrence. Hungary and Serbia are also building the Budapest-Belgrade freight line as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Szijjártó revealed in January this year that China was Hungary's largest foreign investor in 2024, accounting for nearly half of the total annual investment. Additionally, in 2023, China was also Hungary's largest trading partner outside the EU, with bilateral trade reaching $14.5 billion. In the same year, US-Hungary trade was approximately $13.9 billion. According to data from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, China is Hungary's largest trading partner outside Europe, and Hungary is one of China's most important trading partners in Central and Eastern Europe. In 2024, the total bilateral trade was approximately $16.2 billion, a year-on-year increase of 11.6%. Of this, China's exports to Hungary were approximately $11.4 billion, up 16.5%, and imports from Hungary were approximately $4.8 billion, up 1%. What's even more embarrassing for Washington is that its highly praised economic toolkit is rusting. On April 28, an international rating agency downgraded the outlook for US ports to negative, directly discrediting Biden's supply chain reorganization plan. In contrast, China's Shinwanda Power alone has deployed a 20 gigawatt-hour battery production capacity at its Hungarian base, enough to equip 500,000 electric vehicles. This strategy of countering emptiness with substance makes the US tariff stick a self-defeating dumbbell. Orban previously expressed dissatisfaction with US investment in an interview. He said in a Good Morning Hungary program in February this year that during the Democratic administration, China's investment in Hungary surpassed that of the United States. This is unprecedented. This is, of course, very good. But where did US investment go? We need it, so I hope this agreement will also solve this problem. On February 7th, the Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung also published a lengthy interview with Orban. When asked if Hungary was worried about being pressured by various parties for trying to maintain good relations with the West, China, and Russia simultaneously, he unequivocally gave a negative answer. Orban stated that he believed an agreement could be reached between China and the US, so there was no problem with Hungary maintaining good relations with both simultaneously. On May 15th, the Hungarian government signed a strategic cooperation agreement with Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer BYD at the Hungarian Prime Minister's office. BYD officially announced the establishment of its European headquarters in Budapest and a new European R&D center. Orban stated at the press conference after the signing that the world is in an era of change, with new consumption demands and new manufacturers constantly emerging. China is a leader in electric vehicle technology, and strategic cooperation with China will help lead Hungary into a new era of electric vehicle technology. He said that in recent years, China has repeatedly become Hungary's largest source of foreign investment, meaning Chinese investment has become an important, even indispensable, engine for Hungary's economic growth. Besides the US, the EU's mindset is also quite contradictory. On one hand, it wants to earn money from the Chinese market and do business with us. On the other hand, it fears our rise is too fast. Although cooperation between China and Europe is growing closer as China continues to strengthen, we must understand that the EU is always reluctant to treat us as equals. For example, last year, the EU imposed exceptionally high tariffs on China's new energy vehicles. Orban's presence is like a hard stone stuck in the EU's relatively consistent China policy. For instance, many EU countries have repeatedly disseminated large amounts of false information to maliciously smear China's image. To create momentum, they have also attempted to issue condemnations in the name of the EU. In response, Hungary, as a major EU member state, was the first to express displeasure. Orban has repeatedly exercised his veto power, thwarting the EU's attempts. For this, the EU even specifically watered down its wording, hoping Orban would be lenient and not cause trouble. But the result was as expected. Orban once again exercised his veto power. In response, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock publicly expressed dissatisfaction, openly criticizing Hungary on this matter, saying it undermined European cohesion and threatening to make an example of Hungary. However, Orban strongly retorted, "Even if we vote 100 times, the result will be the same." In 2016, the illegal South China Sea Arbitration Tribunal made a ruling unfavorable to China. Hungary immediately stood up to oppose it, hindering the adoption of the document and calling on EU countries to remain neutral. Ultimately, the EU could only issue a neutral statement, which for them was a pointless exercise. Therefore, many EU member states harbor deep resentment towards Orban. While not to the extent of wanting to eat his flesh and sleep on his skin, they genuinely hope Orban will step down soon. However, much to the dismay of his EU counterparts, Orban has not fulfilled their wish. Since becoming Prime Minister for the second time in 2010, Orban has been re-elected 5 times. To this day, Orban still steers Hungary, and he has proven his pro-China stance through his actions. In 2010, Orban, in his second term as Prime Minister, proposed the famous Look East policy, actively establishing friendly relations with China and joining the China-led Belt and Road Initiative in 2015, making Hungary the first European country to do so. Since then, Orban has repeatedly spoken out for China and vigorously strengthened cooperation between China and Hungary. In February 2023, the Hungarian Prime Minister met with the Chinese Foreign Minister. During their conversation, Orban frankly expressed that he would unswervingly implement a friendly policy towards China, which China believes. To this day, the US-forged world order is faltering, while the rise of the Eastern great power is unstoppable. Faced with changes unseen in a century, Orban, with his exceptional political foresight, has sided with peace. In the foreseeable future, Hungary will undoubtedly prosper more within the context of bilateral cooperation. That's all for today's program. If you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your clicks mean a lot to me. See you next time.